So hey everyone, really excited to present on in Illuminate 2022 as in, and the topic I'm gonna talk about is basically on composability. So we've actually seen a lot of uh, Derek, Sergey, as well as Colton present on cross chain smart contracts and basically the future of where we're headed. And Moonbeam is basically at the center of it all, right? So um, what I'm going to talk about is about composability and its potential to sort of like supercharge DeFi utility, which has often been something underlooked, because when you talk about what you can do in DeFi, especially in newer chains, right? Like Moonbeam, there are limited stuff that can be done, right? So composability is obviously one of the fundamental building blocks in creating a robust and sticky ecosystem. And harnessing composability is would really open up novel use cases throughout the ecosystem, which will accrue value, right, and create stickiness. And that's how users stay in the ecosystem, right? Especially with the advent of cross-chain messaging layer XCM, right, by Polkadot, as well as the slew of native projects building across Moonbeam. So that is something which is uh, really, really interesting, and that basically adds on the layer of composability, which I'm about to share with you now, right? So basically, the first question is, what is composability? We hear this a lot. It may sound complex, but it's actually quite simple, right? And if you come across composability, I'm pretty sure you've come across the term Legos or money Legos, right? So composability is basically the ability to interoperate between DeFi protocols, uh, resulting in the creation of really novel product services and uh, an efficient way of doing things, right? And at the end of the day, users will benefit because they have access to a lot of novel mechanisms that is really unique to DeFi. So money Legos is basically Legos, right? In composability is basically a good way to have a visual reference or anchor on understanding composability, right? Where you can trustlessly and permissionlessly leverage on various sort of like protocols, the functions, the code, the services, right? Which interoperable, right? You can fork them, you can unlock various use cases, right? Create layers and layers of products and services, right? So that is interesting because that allows all these products to work in tandem, and thereby creating a parallel financial system that is globally accessible, open finance, right, without any centralized authority, right? So that's why it's as I mentioned, it's a unique value proposition of DeFi, which really should be harnessed, right? And the open source nature of DeFi also enables this decentralized applications, adapts, right, and protocols to leverage each other's codes and utility, and thereby facilitating sort of like a synergistic effect. Now, why I say it's quite unique, right? Because if you look at the financial, traditional finance, right, there is, I mean, composability is limited because there are firewalls, right, in between. For example, any financial services entities like banks, right? You can't use your fixed deposits, right, and generate another layer of yields, right, beyond the borders of the bank or even within the bank itself, right? So unlike DeFi, where you can, and as a lot of protocols or products and services uh, are currently existing in DeFi, where you can really add layers and layers of yield maximization or interoperate with other protocols within the ecosystem, whether it be borrowing, lending, CDPs or collateralized debt positions, staking, farming, and those will be sort of like expounded later on in the slides. So basically, that's one of the very interesting part of why me and my team is sort of like very excited to build on DeFi, because there's so much use cases that you can create and innovate on, right? So because DeFi is simply what you call open finance without barriers, right? Which means that you can really pick whatever Legos or services and then combine it with another piece and create something, create your own masterpiece, right? So there is literally no limit on what can be created when as a DeFi protocol, and all of this can be created to serve any kind of financial appetite or within the spectrum of uh, uh, create the conceptualization and creation of projects uh, across the entire risk return spectrum, right? So before that, I think it's very important to sort of like give context, right? Give context to the current trend that really has fostered, successfully fostered composability within DeFi. And that is basically the service oriented approach in smart contracts. Now, when taking a step back, when we talk about, um, a key shift or ecosystem, which is already underway, right? There is a shift towards a more service-oriented architecture, right? In which protocols can compose, right, different services very efficiently and securely, right? And this is the general direction that standard computing architecture has sort of like evolved towards, right? Where you look at monolithic architecture, basically large, a single architecture, which are closed systems that you can't really compose, right, with another system, right? Because all that work is going to the system that is only for its own use cases and benefit, and that's not something that can be reused by others or composed by others, right? And if you look at the history of smart contracts since 2014 when Ethereum launched, right? Uh, there is already, I mean, that there is already that manifestation of the evolution, right? Because when you look at the start, at smart contracts, mainly the use cases were around DAOs, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations as well as tokenization, right? And this were often sort of like monolithic in a sense that the codes underlying the smart contracts were written in big chunks, right? That ended up not being secure because they were written in this sort of like rigid, non-compatible kind of format, right? And many of those early smart contracts were not really usable or made to be reused by others, right? And then you see the shift towards microservices, which sort of like manifested into what we see today in terms where protocols can easily compose different services and functions, right? They as the service oriented approach allows people to sort of like make multiple independent services that allows them to interact in secure and very very useful ways, right? And this is really what our ecosystem is trying to achieve when we seek to create composability within DeFi, right? Uh, I mean, the basically the three main things when you talk about a service-oriented architecture over, say, monolithic, right? Which is a service-oriented architecture is improves your security assumptions, right? By basically separating or compartmentalizing different concerns, right? So that's obviously a very important thing, right? And second is that you get the reusability, right, of these services. So anybody sort of like putting effort into those services makes them has the ability to make them useful for others to leverage on them, right? Creating a network effect, right? And the last is that the composition of those services really allows for rapid iterations in ways that we couldn't have, that ways that within a monolithic structure, single application kind of structure wouldn't have, right? So going from an architecture on a sort of like single resource that's really close, right, siloed, right, and that's possibly built in a very stacked, a very complicated way, where there's a lot of issues can arise or can be hidden, right? And then we are moving towards a more dynamic structure where under service oriented architecture we have multiple smaller services within the that can interact within one protocol and be used in other protocols, right? So that's why now you see this wide ranging sort of like advanced DeFi protocols that leverages on a different services that facilitates composability and the creation of products and services, layers and layers of products and services that are built on top of one another, each creating their own sort of like flavor or value proposition, right? So, for example, within Moonbeam, you can see, StellsSwap is at the heart of it all because we're a primitive, right? We facilitate efficient trading. So, working with teams like Moonwell, Beefy, for auto compounding, and My for uh, my as in a stable coin minting, right? So being composed together in a more advanced product, sharing value and sharing functionality, it really unlocks value across the ecosystem and creates more products and services for the end user, right? Which is now not only limited to basic primitives like borrowing, lending, as well as swapping and farming. So beyond that, right, which is what DeFi is generally all about and where the exciting part of it all, right? Now, uh, so what are the requirements of composability? Now, this is a very important thing, especially in the context of Moonbeam, where we just a month ago we there was a governance vote with regards to ecosystem incentives, right? So because we wanted to restart the ecosystem with grants, and StellsSwap was one of uh, the main decks that got the level 3 ecosystem grants, right? And that is a very important thing because that that falls into the first requirement for having optimal composability, right? Number one is having a robust mix or lineup of dexes, right, across the board, right? Dexes as well as lending and borrowing markets, which are often called the primitives, basically basic essential services that is required in any ecosystem, right? So in order to unlock the power of composability, the first sort of a building block is having DeFi primitives in action and being live, right? So that's us, in DEX as a DEX, as well as Moonwell as a lending and borrowing markets. Both of us were the only projects that got the highest tier of grants. So that I mean, having the primitives there operational is basically the first step, and number two is the most important step is basically fostering baseline liquidity. So with the grants, right, that we have gotten, so that created the um, basically the that spurred the growth of the ecosystem by sort of like distributing the ecosystem grants into liquidity mining incentives, right? And that facilitated the growth of uh, of of liquidity across assets, strategic assets, right? Which are sort of like categorized into two main things, right? Which are native assets as well as breached assets. So under the banner of Moonbeam Ignite, which is basically a unified banner uh, for for spurring the growth of the ecosystem with ecosystem grants. Right now, we're working with the foundation, with Moonwell, with a lot of other uh, protocols in the ecosystem to sort of like get the message out, get more eyeballs, get more tractions, and all of that concentrated effort is basically to increase baseline depth, increase grassroots engagement with users, right? To fuel liquidity depth within the ecosystem. Why is baseline liquidity important? Because without baseline liquidity, you can't. There is no efficient price discovery. So you can't. People can't make basic trades efficiently. Right? They will face slippages. They will face fragmented liquidity. The cost of trading is generally high, and that sort of like puts off anyone from participating and building on it, right? And that's why having the requisite baseline depth is important to allow the basic functions of trading to occur, right? And that is where StellsSwap is positioned to facilitate efficient trading, and that's why we're actually uh, an integrated DEX with hybrid AMMs, right? Which includes a standard AMM, a stable AMM, as well as an upcoming concentrated liquidity AMM, which we are calling Pulsar, which is we're going to launch a beta in a few weeks. But all of that, I mean, the accumulation of all those AMMs uh, strive to sort of like all of that has a singular objective, right? Which is to make trading as efficient as possible. Right? And that's the most important thing in the creation of baseline liquidity. Once there is the requisite market depth, then you can have normal resumption of market activity where there is a robust marketplace for efficient price discovery. And once that's there, I mean, it's very easy for other projects, which is the third requirement, which is other novel dApps to build on top of the primitives, right? And to compose the underlying inputs of the primitives, to create more products and more services. So that's why number two, baseline liquidity is very important. And with the recent ecosystem grants being live in StellsSwap and soon to be in Moonwell, so that sets the stage for the next year, which is facilitating or fostering the creation, sort of like novel dApps and use cases going live. And here we've just listed a few, Beefy, Lido, My, as well as Axela, as in just now Sergey talked about Axela. So those infrastructures and sort of like use cases that is very important to create ecosystem stickiness, right? Which is the next phase of a fully functioning and robust ecosystem. So all of these three foundations is really important to set the base for optimal composability, where the products and services that are created in DeFi, would strive to make it a very effective way of creating products and services that it will be used by people in an efficient manner. So let's, I mean, obviously I've talked about definition of composability as well as the requirements. So let's take a look at, how the potential of composability and what sort of like that entails for developers and end users, right? Obviously for developers where they have a more arsenal, right? More tools to create novel applications, right? And as well as use cases, within their protocols, that is something that having the plethora of services, and functions to call from, to build on, that, I mean, that means that, there is, I mean, you can really expand your products and services within your protocol, right? Which you can't find it in, the traditional space. So that's those are very interesting stuff for a builder to wake up, and build, right? Because DeFi is very new. It's in its infancy stages, right? And therefore, the amount of things that can be created by developers, right? With a little bit of innovation and ingenuity, you can create something very new, something original, right? And with with a service-oriented approach where which fosters composability, it makes it easy for developers or projects to create, right? To build on top of one another and to create the synergy of or value add across the board. So, and that's for the that's for the developers, right? And for the users, right? This is pretty. I mean, it's pretty straightforward for the users. I mean, beyond going to DeFi to sort of like just purely swap, or provide liquidity to earn yields, right? Or lending and borrowing, with composability, I mean, you're creating layers and layers of product on top of that that opens up utilities or use cases on that, right? So that's why it's it is very sort of like a interesting to look at that, and with StellsSwap, we're at the sort of like we're at the epicenter of that, right? So I'm just gonna end off with with the an action an example of composability, which is about to go live now, which is, you can see liquid staking dot, and you can farm it on StellsSwap, and then you can use the LP to go in beefy to auto compound, and then mint mine on the back of it and stake that newly minted mine to our meta pool. So those are the examples of composability that we're trying to sort of like facilitate and foster. So I think my time is up. So please reach out to us, to explore more use cases and utility. I think we're very interested to spearhead growth for the ecosystem.